Welcome to the HorsePlayerNow.com Night School Introduction to Handicapping long-form video. Stay tuned because later we're going to give you a complete how to read the program lesson utilizing Equibase past performances. We're going to lead off with an introductory handicapping theory discussion featuring HorsePlayerNow.com's Brian W. Spencer, Brian Nadeau, and myself, Joe Christofak. Next up, Bob Newmeyer of NBC Sports gives us his take on the best methods for learning the game. HorsePlayerNow.com's Jeremy Plunk educates on how to read the tote board information on the television monitors. And finally, a full lesson on how to read past performances for both Thoroughbred, hosted by me, Joe Christofak, and Harness Racing with the Meadowlands' Ken Workington. Stay tuned. If you have a basic interest in racing, it's time to take the next step. With knowledge comes horsepower. Hope you enjoy. HorsePlayerNow.com's Joe Christofak alongside the team of Brian W. Spencer, far left, and Brian Nadeau right next to me. And guys, tonight we're going to talk about newbie handicapping. And Brian Nadeau, I'll start with you. As our fearless leader, Jeremy Plunk, likes to say, we can teach you how to wager in about 10 minutes. It takes a lifetime to learn how to handicap. We're always learning something new every day. But there is a foundation for handicapping. Where does it start?
Well, I think it's important to show a newcomer exactly how a race might unfold on the track and how that carries on to the past performances. So I might want to, first of all, maybe give a little overview of a race to someone, which horses like to be up front, maybe run in the middle, maybe run from far back, and then kind of develop things from there. If they're getting an understanding of that, then maybe show them a running style of an individual horse and say, you know, look at this horse was 7th here after a quarter mile, then he was 3rd, then he took the lead, and then he won by a length and 2/4 or what have you, and try to let them gauge how a race might play out. Because I think as handicappers, it's really important to have a kind of an image in your mind at how a race might play out on paper and then onto the racetrack.
Well, Brian, that brings us to an obvious question which has to do with the pace of the race, and it's one of the fundamentals of handicapping. How do you go about explaining to a newcomer how racing works, in that there are speed horses, there are pressers, there are stalkers, there are closers? Brian Nadeau mentioned visualizing. How's the race going to play out? How do you explain that to somebody?
Well, I think especially when you're beginning to work with the program, there are 3 things that I like to try to teach people right off the bat, and that's the difference in distances, classes, and pace. So I think that the easiest way to try to show somebody the way that the eventual pace on the track may look in the program is just to go through the program. We don't have to be talking about the race that's in 25 minutes. I want to find a race where there's a lone speed horse or way too many speed horses, because that's the easiest way for me to say, there's 9 horses in this race, 6 of them want to go to the lead. I'm going to show you how you can figure out that they all want to go to the lead, and then let's try to play the race out in our minds before they actually load at the gate. Vice versa, if I can identify a lone speed horse, I think that that's one of the easiest ways to get reading the program to click in a newcomer's mind, is by saying, look, do you see a lot of 1s in the early running lines anywhere else beside this one horse? And then that's going to give you a chance to, I mean, maybe the horse is no good, but at least you can show somebody how to identify what lone speed looks like and what too much speed looks like, and then you can go from there.
Well, Brian mentioned class, and in order to keep racing competitive and therefore bettable, there are different classes of racing. Maidens have never won a race, explaining that to people. Explaining the claiming game to people, that horses are actually for sale in some of these races. Explaining allowance races, and then that those are for the graduates of the good maiden races and horses that have potential. And then explaining stakes races. How do you go about explaining the different classes of races to people and how different horses fit under the conditions of a particular race?
Well, I think a rough guideline is the purse. I mean, it's not universal, but the lower the purse, the lower the class. I mean, it's not a finely tuned way of looking at it, but it's for a beginner, I think it's a good way to look at it. A claiming race for $10,000 is a lot less not as classy as a claiming race for a $40,000 horse. So I think if they get that scale in their mind, that sliding scale, you know, a grade 3 race is not as good as a grade 1 race and things like that, then they can start grasping classes and how different horses fit. If they know that a $40,000 race is much better than a $10,000 race, well, they might know that a $10,000 horse is out of place in a $40,000 race. And then they can kind of start acting accordingly and who they might like, who they might not. And it really does all start with class and how you understand it.
And Brian, what about distances when it comes to sprints versus routes? And then when it comes to track conditions where you have dirt, poly track, turf, obviously it's important to understand the differences in the distances, in the track, even in the track condition. Is it important for you to go into that program, one of the first things that you do, and show people how to interpret and understand that information?
I think in some ways that's sort of a very fine line to walk, because that's a lot of information to throw at people. At the same time, what you want to do when you're just starting off handicapping and learning to read the program is you want to say, today these horses are going to run 6 furlongs. If I've got a horse who's been showing absolutely no speed going a mile and a 16th in its last 10 races, then that horse is probably not going to be able to keep up cutting back to 6 furlongs. So what you want to do is you want to be able to point to similar races to today. It doesn't necessarily even have to be at the same class level, but let's say if we're running on the dirt. Okay, when was the last time this horse ran at 6 furlongs on the dirt? Let's concentrate on those 3 or 4 races first, and then we can go back and learn to incorporate the mile and a 16th dirt races or the occasional turf race that may interrupt that form here and there. So I think that that's where it's very valuable, is to pull out those specific running lines as they pertain to today's specific race at that distance, that surface, or somewhere very close if we're splitting hairs with 16ths of a mile here and there.
Now, Brian Nadeau, one thing that newcomers gravitate to in the program is statistics. Jockey statistics, trainer statistics, jockey names, trainer names. Jockeys and trainers that they know they're probably going to be more apt to bet on. Do you agree with a newcomer gravitating towards jockey and trainer statistics, or do you try to get them off of that and try to get them to graduate into actually figuring out how a race is going to work, regardless of who's training or who's riding?
Personally, and there are people that might disagree with me, I don't think a jockey has a lot to do with a horse winning or losing. I mean, you can't pick up a horse and drag him over to finish line.
Corey Lannery said it best. He said the jockey's job is to make as few mistakes as possible.
Yeah.
So
I think, it's always good to know the percentages and who's better than, supposedly better, and especially trainers. I mean, higher percentages are going to win more races, obviously. But I would much rather the person understand the race in and of itself than saying, I'm going to bet on Rosie Napravnik because I saw her on 60 Minutes, or I'm going to bet on Joel Rosario because he had a good week last week. Rosario. So I would much rather have them understand the race and how it might be run out on the track, as opposed to wagering on, who they like or the who they've heard of.
And this may be sort of the next step to that, is what I try to explain to people, and again, people may disagree with me here, but I might be on the same page with you. We often do these and they say, okay, I'm gonna bet based on the jockey. And I try to explain that, at least in my personal opinion, at any given meet, there's sort of that upper tier of riders, maybe 3-4 of them tops, who are significantly, or at least a little bit better than the rest. And then you maybe have, we're not going to name names, but the sort of bottom tier, which it consists of maybe 5 or 6 jockeys that you don't trust because they do make mistakes. And then everybody else in the middle, by and large, is completely interchangeable to me. The only thing that I really, really want to see is when a horse gets a positive rider change, when a horse has been ridden by a jockey who maybe I'd consider in that bottom tier, and all of a sudden now they have one of those really excellent jockeys. But I don't really see a lot of value in saying, oh, well, this 14% jockey is way better than this 12% jockey. It's more important how the race plays out on paper and how you expect it to play out on the track, because by and large, I don't think there's that much of a difference between 80% of the riders at any given colony.
Now, there's 2 tricks that I like to show people that come to the track that don't necessarily have to do with the past performances, but there are tools that people can use in order to put them in a position to win when they don't know that much about how to interpret the information. One of those things is writing the opening odds down and comparing them to the morning line if it's a reputable morning line. Seeing early action on a horse sometimes can steer you in the right direction, or seeing a big difference between morning line odds and current odds on the board as they fluctuate throughout the 20 minutes leading up to the race. The other thing is visuals, looking at a physical specimen of a racehorse. Anyone that has any sort of idea of what a healthy animal looks like can look at a racehorse when they come out in the post parade and say, that horse looks happy, healthy, on their toes. Teach them a few clues of what they can look for in a post parade, in warm-ups, in the paddock. Visually, handicapping is fun that way. People get a kick out of interpreting a horse's body language and not necessarily learning the information in the program or having a combination of both. Are there any little tricks that you guys like to teach people that is separate from the program information that can help put them on?
Well, I think, sorry if I cut you off there. I think that a lot of people are, when they're just starting out, or even if they're sort of just intermediate players and they're still looking to us for a little bit of guidance, they get a little nervous about trying to judge horse flesh in the paddock or in the post parade. And I often say that, I mean, there's definitely some learning that goes into it and some experience, but by and large, you can tell if a horse is looking good. I always say, did you ever see Zenyatta before a race? She is the A+ of all A+s every time she walked out. You could tell from me the way I walk. Are my shoulders slouched? Am I walking slowly? Or do I have a pep in my step? Am I feeling a little bit better? You don't want to put too many human characteristics onto a racehorse.
But I will say, a lot of people see a horse that's all riled up and they think that's a good sign.
Right.
That's one thing you need to talk people off of immediately, is when a horse wants to throw the jockey off in the post parade, they're not raring to go.
Yeah.
I'm not advocating, a horse who's flipping out, but I'm talking a prancy dance rather than like a techno dance.
You don't want to see a horse lose his race before the actual
race. But a
race.
lot of people take that as a positive sign that don't know what they're looking at, so we can put that out there right from the beginning.
Good call.
I think you could say, you're not an expert at looking at horses, but if a horse is standing out, you're going to see it. They're just different. They have a different air about them. Like Spence said, that it's almost a quiet confidence almost, and they're not antsy, they're not sweating, they're not lathered up. They just have a maybe not necessarily a look, but they're giving out a feel that they're going to run and they're feeling really good.
Yeah. Another basic piece of information that I think newcomers gravitate to, and maybe one of the best pieces of information that can be taught to somebody, are the speed figures. Mm-hmm. How do you go about utilizing the speed figure, whether it's the DRF buyer number, the Equibase speed figure, a Briss number? It's an easy number that can quantify a horse's performance, but they can also fluctuate, and people don't understand why they fluctuate. Right. How do you go about explaining to people how the speed figures work, how important they are, and how the numbers can differ from race to race?
I think I'll talk about the buyers, and then you can handle the rest. Basically, the buyer, the higher the number, the better, and it's a relatively arbitrary figure, and it doesn't necessarily distinguish between classes, but it's just the higher the number, the better. Now, some people like, the different figures. Spence will talk about other figures. I don't think speed figures are the end-all, be-all anymore, especially with the work we do, which is more trip handicapping. But what I will say, as far as the buyers go, I think they do a good job of at least telling you who can and can't win. If you have 10 horses in a race and 7 of them are running buyers in the 80s and the other 3 are running buyers in the 50s, the other 3 they're not going to win. They're just not going to win. So I think if you can kind of differentiate and put them to your own personal good use, you can use them to your benefit. But if you're just betting the highest number, I don't think that works maybe like it used to.
And I think what I usually like to tell people is that I find speed figures of all types more useful just in trying to tell me who can win, possibly, and who can't win. Even if a horse, now let's take one of your 50 buyer horses that you were saying. If that horse has run a couple of 80s in the past, we can say at least this horse has proven capable of it. So for me, it's more about cutting out horses on the bottom. And as you go along, get to know your speed figures and find the speed figure or figures that you trust and that work for you. If you're the kind of person who wants a speed figure to factor in the notion that your horse was 5 wide on both turns, most of those figures are not going to help you. There are sheets that will help you that do take that into account. So it's important to not put too much into them until you're at least comfortable knowing on the slightest basis how they're made and what they take into account. And in that way, you can at least have an advantage of knowing why you're including a horse as a potential winner or throwing them out as a horse who has no chance.
One of my favorite things that I like to do and like to teach people is how to watch a race. You'll see someone rooting for their horse, the jockey's in an all-out drive, their horse is completely empty, and the person may believe that, it was the rider's fault, or why didn't their horse run better? I think it's important to stand in front of a television set and show people how to watch a race when a jockey has a tight hold versus when a jockey is scrubbing or when a jockey is whipping. How much do they have left in the gas tank? That I think is a very, very important factor. Also, when they're learning how to handicap, how many horses were in that race? If you're looking at a running line and a horse finished fourth, but there were 5 horses in the race, it's a lot different than a horse finishing fourth when there are 12 horses in a race. Show them where to find that information. There are simple things within the track program that anyone can understand if taught the right way. And I think the moral of the story is, guys, it's all a process. You have to start somewhere. Understanding what the information means is first. Understanding how to interpret it comes next.
It's a process that kind of all molds itself together and that gives you maybe that final answer to the puzzle. And there's nothing better than, no better feeling than picking a winner. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's,
when you have a correct opinion.
Yes, when your opinion is correct and it gets rewarded, you take a great amount of satisfaction in that, and it's all part of it. The post parade, the odds, on how the horse looks on paper, the pace of the race, the class, it all comes together, and that's spits out the horse that you happen to like, and you get your opinion rewarded when they win. And what better feeling is that?
Spence, if you were to give someone advice on how to learn how to handicap, reading books, watching races, hanging out with other people that know the game better than you do, and becoming a sponge, what are some of the pieces of advice besides what I just said, or maybe including what I just said, that you would give someone?
I think there are 2 main things for me. And the first one is finding people whose opinions you trust. Not necessarily that you're going to blindly bet all of their selections, but somebody who gives you a reason for why they made their selection, and where you value that opinion and you trust them that they're telling you what they really think. And in that way, you can soak up all that information. And here's the personal lesson that still sort of blows my mind every day is 20 years ago when I was, in elementary school, and I decided, and my mom used to take me to the track, I was a little math kid, and I was like, I'm gonna beat this game. This is a puzzle, because to me, puzzles could be solved. They could be finished. You could know all there is to know. Completely wrong. 20 years later, I'm still learning stuff, and I know that I have been told throughout, I can be a little assertive with my opinion sometimes, and people will sometimes put me back in my place and say, keep learning, keep an open mind. And those are the lessons that, to me, I value the most in my handicapping career, because I'm still trying to search for new angles, new things that work for me that I would have thought that I would never have learned or never have needed to know. So keep an open mind and just know that there's never an end point to learning this and getting better as a handicapper and a bettor.
Great answer, right?
Well, I think Spence hit it on you can never learn too much. And every day you learn something new, and every day it's like adding another club to your bag that just helps you along, and the more knowledge, the better. And I think the best thing he said was surrounding yourself with people you trust. And there's nothing better than bouncing opinions off of someone else and then getting a different point of view, a different perspective. And you say, oh, you know what? I never thought of it that way. You're right. And that makes sense to me. And it's great to be able to have friends or colleagues or whoever that you can trust and bounce things off of and get constructive criticism and just a different point of view, which I think is in this game, like you said, you can be assertive in your picks or whatever, and sometimes you can have blinkers on in this game and you be a little too narrow-minded, and somebody else can put you in your place or offer a different perspective, and I think that's great.
I'm going to give you 3 pieces of advice. First piece of advice is handicap the race, no matter what level you're at. Handicap it at your own speed. Watch the race. Understand why it happened the way it did. Go back and figure it out. If you missed something, if a horse won that you thought had no chance, I would say 18, 19 times out of 20, even if our opinions are wrong, we understand why the result happened.
Sure.
Go back, watch the replay, read the chart, understand why the result happened, and as Brian said, add more clubs to your bag. Secondly, night school. We do this for a reason. We have a different topic every week. If you miss a Tuesday night class, go back and read the archive, whether it's a video, whether it's a radio episode, or whether it's a chat. You can get a lot of great information, a lot of great opinions by visiting Night School. Third, the race chats. You guys have both hosted race chats. It's learning in real time. You're trading opinions with horse players from all over the country. There's some really good horse players in there. And there's a lot of people that just sit and watch and learn. And every 5 races, somebody will pop up and say, that was a great opinion. Thanks for that. I would have never used that horse. I used it. I hit the trifecta. I hit the pick 4 because of what you said. The real-time race chats and playing the races online in a chat scenario with the live video and other horse players at all sorts of different levels doing it with you, that's a fantastic learning tool in my opinion.
And it's not just about the host. I can't tell you how many times I'm writing, what seems like a small manifesto about why I like a horse, and then some chatter who I may not even know will just drop one line in there that blows my mind about the horse that I liked, about something I didn't even see, something I didn't even realize. So I think that, like you said, you get all levels in there, and just the back and forth and well, here's why I think you're wrong, or here's an additional concern I may have about your horse. And it just sort of gets those gears going. Right. And even if it doesn't change my opinion, it sort of tucks that nugget away that says, well, next time I need to look for that, just to make sure I'm incorporating as much as I possibly can into my handicapping to give myself the best chance to win.
I think the chats, like you said, are great. They're one big melting pot where everybody can kind of converge, bounce stuff off the wall, say I like this and you say you like that, and then it all comes together. And the best part about this sport is we get to find out if we're right or wrong, and it takes about 90 seconds, and we get to do it again every 25 minutes. And what more can, you can't ask for anything more than that.
Learning how to handicap races is a lifelong process. It's entertainment, it's ego, it's being right, it's getting paid for it. For Brian W. Spencer and Brian Nadeau, I'm Joe Christofak. Enjoy this episode of Night School and the lifetime quest of handicapping.
I think that there's so much to learn about handicapping, and where do you start? Well, there's so many facets to it. I think when you, first of all, understand the distance of racing and how that works. There are sprint races, there are route races, usually 6 furlongs, 3/4, a mile, mile and an eighth. Get accustomed to the different distances of racing and try to get a feel for which horse likes which distance. You can see that in a racing form or past performances just by kind of analyzing and see that certain horses are more effective running short at 6 furlongs. Some horses are more effective on the lead at 6 furlongs, need to have the lead to win a race. And almost you just kind of look at it as a puzzle and you just try to figure out which ones will be better at which distances. So that's a good place to start. Speed figures to me are interesting because they give you kind of a view of just how fast a horse ran in a given race. Now there may be some things that happen that may throw that off a little bit. A track might be very fast that day and maybe the figures are a little off, but that'll kind of give you an idea of how good the horse is. So if you kind of combine the speed figures along with an understanding of distance, and maybe if you can look into class as well. We have claiming races, we have what they call allowance races, which are for horses that can't be claimed. I think those are the 3 elements to look at, is speed figures, a feel for the distances of races, and also the class of the horse. And I think that would give you a good start in learning how to handicap.